I decided to react to a video, very short video, by Mo Freedom Foundation, who is a YouTuber who criticizes American foreign policy. Now, obviously, the US does have foreign policy issues. I'll be the first to admit that. But I feel like that, and he has good things in this Russia-Ukraine video. Now, this Ukraine video was from 10 years ago, so maybe his opinions have changed since then. But he hasn't taken it down, so I'm presuming that he still stands by it. So we're going to react to this video, and I'm not going to react to the whole video because the first part of the video is actually good. But when we get to just after 1 minute, that's when we get to some issues.
The U.S. stepped up and made a simple promise that NATO's boundaries would not move beyond what was then East Germany. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker assured the Russians that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east. This promise was important. Russia believed it. They allowed Germany to reunify. They allowed the Warsaw Pact to disintegrate. Then, in 1991, in an incredible step, they let the old Russian Empire, known then as the USSR, fall apart. This included territories, like Crimea in the Ukraine, that had been Russian for hundreds of years. Thanks in part to NATO's promise, Europe's horrific 20th century ordeal was finally over. Unfortunately, the promise that the United States made barely held for a decade.
Now, this is true, but it's misleading. He says that the United States barely held on to this promise. This agreement he's referring to is in 1990, when the US promised the Soviet Union that they would not expand NATO to the east. Now, two things. First of all, this was not an official agreement. This wasn't written down on documents. This was just like a verbal promise that President Bush Sr. and the US government made to the Soviet Union. But then the Soviet Union collapsed. So not only is the agreement not written down on paper, but it was also made by the Bush administration, which got voted out in 1992 to Bill Clinton, and the Soviet Union, which collapsed and became Russia, Ukraine, and all the other states. So this agreement doesn't have any holdings. So when the USSR collapsed, the US was like, it was a victory. The US won the Cold War. So Russia having complaints about this agreement doesn't make any sense. You lost the Cold War, accept it. The countries of Eastern Europe are now free. They're free to be democracies. So if they want to join NATO or not, that's their decision.
The 90s were pretty bad for Russia. Despite the fact that the Cold War was already over, the Clinton administration couldn't resist continuing to fight it. Suck it, Boris!
Now, this is another misleading. When Bill Clinton was elected in 1992, he was originally not really concerned about foreign policy. He was running on domestic matters. There was a recession of 1992. So he didn't really care. He obviously did care. He's the President of the United States. But his expertise wasn't foreign policy. So when he was elected, he just wasn't concerned himself with Eastern Europe. Then the Balkan War, Yugoslav War happened. And then the Republicans came to Bill Clinton and said, if you don't accept Poland, Czech, and Hungary into NATO, then we will get the heroes of the anti-communist movements like Lech Wałęsa. We'll bring them over to the US and we'll get them to campaign against you. Obviously, Bill Clinton doesn't want to lose the Polish or Hungarian vote in the United States, so he switched and decided to expand NATO. So once again, he is accurate. No, not accurate. He's telling the truth that Bill Clinton did continue on America and NATO and the expansion of Eastern Europe. Not saying that isn't true, but he's forgetting the backstory behind why Bill Clinton did it. And why did he do it? Because Republicans pressured him to.
In 1999, we took advantage of Russia's weakness and added much of the old Warsaw Pact to NATO. In 2004, noted foreign policy genius George Bush went even further, adding the rest of the Warsaw Pact and countries that had once been part of the USSR.
You could make the argument that the Baltics shouldn't have been incorporated in NATO because that would just make Russia angry. But by this point, Putin had made himself an autocrat. So for the Baltics, who were forced into the USSR in 1940, they're thinking, this is bad. We want to join NATO. We want to be protected against Russia. Putin's an autocrat. We want to join NATO. This idea, and this is also one thing that actually gets me a bit festered up, is that he says it like it's just America's will to expand it to the east, when he should really point out in the video that countries apply to join NATO. It's not that America just sends an invite to Romania and says, hey, Romania, you want to join NATO? No, it's not that. Romania and Poland and other states apply to join. So, as I said, he's just leaving out very important information. He is.
In 2008, elements within NATO made it clear that they intended to ask Georgia and Ukraine to join. This was too much for Russia. In 2008, with some help from the Georgian president, Putin engineered an invasion of Georgia. This seemed to cool NATO down a bit. It reminded us that we were a military organization, and maybe we should be a little more careful about what we were committing to. Despite this clear warning, the Obama administration continued NATO's expansion. Adding Croatia and Albania had no purpose other than cementing the pointless idea that closer links to NATO and the European Union were an automatic thing. In early
Okay, he's missing out, once again, important information. Ukraine just suffered a terrorist attack from Putin. In 2004, the pro-Western candidate for the presidency ran for president, and he was poisoned by Putin and his operatives, whatever, KGB, FSB, I don't care what you call it, okay? He was poisoned. He won the election where he became president, but this was the first obvious sign to the West that this man isn't this man who's going to try and bring Russia and the West together. He's going to return things back how they were. Remember, guys, he was a KGB officer. Now, on to the next part. So what if NATO brought in Croatia and Albania? Who the hell cares? Croatia and Albania are nowhere near Russia. They're just close Western allies, and they made it official by joining NATO. And that's as simple as that.
2014, when the United States helped to overthrow the shitty but democratically elected president of Ukraine in the name of a treaty with the EU.
It's the first time which I can say it is a flat-out lie. There is no evidence that the West... He's basically saying that the West conspired the Maidan Revolution 2013 to 2014. They didn't. What happened is that, true to the EU, the president of Ukraine was going to sign a treaty with the EU as the Ukrainian people wanted. But Putin said, I'll give you this amount of money if you don't. And he took it. The president took the deal. There's a different president than the one who's poisoned. The Ukrainian people were upset. Some of them protested. And what was the Ukrainian president's response? Massacring them, basically. Treated them like, you send the police and, beating them, stuff like that. Undemocratic things. And the point of NATO is to preserve democracy in Europe. So, the West is obviously going to be concerned about this. So the West expressed its disapproval at the Ukrainian president. And the Ukrainian people en masse protested, demonstrated, and demanded that President Yushchenko, the president of Ukraine at the time, leave office.
An outsized reaction from Russia was the easiest thing to predict in the world. To review, this is where the border of the anti-Russian military alliance was in 1990, when the U.S. promised it wouldn't expand another inch. Here is where it stands today. Putin is certainly a bad actor. He is using Western aggression to cover for the fact that he's turning Russia into the Nigeria of Europe. But why the hell did we give him the excuse?
Because we didn't give him the excuse. We didn't give him any excuse. Russia wouldn't be so concerned about NATO expansion if it was a democracy. That's why Putin is upset about NATO. So what if NATO expands? Ukraine wants to join. Poland wants to join. The Baltics want to join. Romania wants to join. They want to join. It's not America and Britain and France say to the Eastern European countries, hey, join us. Come over here. Come here. It's not like that. They requested to join. The people chose by large majorities to join NATO. And Putin, who is not bound by the people's will, but by his own autocratic will, he's still salty over the collapse of the USSR. That is my reaction, my first reaction video, actually. I mean, there was the Piers Morgan video of Andrew Tate. But this is my first, full dichotomy. And one last thing, I promise the left response of UK rights will be done. Have a good one. It's the Big B, and he is out.